If this is a financially driven offense, what the statistics and my experience come together to suggest to me is that there's one of two scenarios that occurred here. Either a person or persons went in to kill this victim and made an attempt to stage an abduction, or, and this is more likely based on the numbers and my experience, went in to abduct her for financial reasons, and it went south. Everything went haywire, and there was the need to eliminate the victim. Now, I will also tell you, and I want to be very sensitive about how I say this, my statistics also tell me that if she is deceased, there is a very low chance that she will ever be located intact. Offenders of this type are going to eliminate every trace of the individual, either by placing them in a deserted area where animals can eliminate the remains, or by burning or dismemberment or something like that. The idea being that in 2026, offenders are just a little too aware of how easy it is to get caught if there is some piece of somebody left. Now, again, it's very heartbreaking for me to say that, but I just think based on the numbers, I do need to say that.
A doorbell camera catches a masked figure standing at the front door. 27 seconds of footage. He raises a gloved hand toward the lens, then walks away. 90 seconds later, he's back. A flashlight gripped in his teeth. He packs wet vegetation over the camera until the picture goes dark. By sunrise, the woman who lives in that house is gone. Blood is later found on the ground outside her front door. Investigators confirm it belongs to her. 5 long months pass. Investigators log more than 40,000 tips. Not one of them has produced a name. Not one has produced an arrest. This is one of the most heavily documented missing persons cases in the country. And somehow, the person who did this has never been identified. Welcome to Case Alert HQ. Today's case, the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. Before we dive in, hit subscribe. We cover verified true crime cases every week. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She was the mother of NBC Today show co-anchor Savannah Guthrie, though for most of her life, she wasn't a public figure at all. She was simply a mother, a grandmother, and a longtime member of her community. She lived in the Catalina foothills, a quiet residential area on the edge of Tucson, Arizona. It had been her home for more than 50 years. She'd raised her children there, watched the neighborhood grow around her, and stayed even after those children moved on with their own lives. To the people who knew her locally, she wasn't famous. She was just Nancy. On the evening of January 31, 2026, she spent the night with family. She had dinner at the home of her daughter, Annie Guthrie, and Annie's husband, Tommaso Cioni. It was, by every account, an ordinary evening. Nothing about it suggested anything was wrong. After dinner, Nancy was driven home, back to the house she'd lived in for decades. Sometime around 1:47 the following morning, the doorbell camera at her home stopped working. At the time, nobody watching would have known that detail mattered. It was just a camera going offline in the middle of the night, the kind of small technical glitch most homes experience without a second thought. The next day was a Sunday. Nancy attended church regularly, without fail. When she didn't show up, the people who expected to see her there knew something was wrong. That absence was the first real sign that something had happened to her. By that afternoon, February 1st, she was officially reported missing. What came next would turn a quiet street in Tucson into the center of a national investigation. When investigators reviewed what the cameras had captured, they were left with a physical description of the person responsible. He appeared to be of average build, somewhere between 5'9" and 5'10". He wore gloves. He carried a black hiking backpack, the kind meant for spending hours outdoors, not the kind someone grabs on a whim. Beyond the footage, investigators turned to the property itself, and what they found there only deepened the mystery. The back door of the house was propped open. Not forced. Not broken. Propped open, as though someone had wanted a way in, or a way out, without leaving obvious signs of a break-in. Outside, near the front of the house, investigators found a damaged floodlight. It wasn't an accident of weather or age. Someone had disabled it, deliberately removing a source of light from the property in the hours before Nancy vanished. Then came the detail that turned this from a disappearance into a crime scene. Blood was discovered near the front entrance of the home. It was sent for testing, and the results confirmed what investigators feared. It belonged to Nancy. In the days that followed, law enforcement moved quickly on their first real lead. A man was detained during a traffic stop south of Tucson, brought in for questioning in connection with the case. For a moment, it seemed like an answer might be close. It wasn't. He was released the following day. No charges were filed against him. He spoke publicly afterward, saying plainly that he had no idea who Nancy Guthrie even was. Investigators found nothing tying him to her disappearance, and his name has not surfaced again since. What remained was a house with a disabled light, a propped door, confirmed blood, and a masked figure caught on camera, but no name attached to any of it. The physical evidence told investigators that this was deliberate. It did not tell them who was responsible. That gap between what the evidence showed and what it couldn't answer is exactly why this case stopped being a local missing persons report within days, and became something far bigger. What started as a single missing persons report quickly became one of the largest active investigations in the country. Within days, it was no longer just local police looking for Nancy. The FBI stepped in. Customs and Border Protection joined. Search and rescue teams were deployed across the surrounding desert terrain. A full multi-agency task force had formed, all working the same case from different angles. On the ground, leading the local side of that effort, was Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos. His department became the central point of contact for a community desperate for answers, and for a family that needed someone coordinating the search in real time. The forensic side of the investigation, though, turned out to be more complicated than anyone expected. The DNA evidence recovered from the scene wasn't clean. It was a mixed sample, meaning it contained genetic material from more than one person, tangled together in a way that made identifying a single suspect far more difficult. A hair sample recovered early on was eventually moved from a private lab to the FBI, in hopes that federal resources could untangle what local testing couldn't. Investigators didn't stop at the house. They fanned out across the surrounding area, canvassing gas stations along nearby routes, hoping some overlooked security camera had captured a vehicle leaving the scene that night. It was slow, painstaking work, the kind that rarely makes headlines but often ends up mattering the most. As the case grew, so did public involvement. Tip lines were flooded. By this point, investigators had logged somewhere between 40 and 50,000 individual tips from the public. Each one had to be logged, weighed, and either followed up on or ruled out, a process that takes real time even when a tip turns out to be nothing. A reward was established to encourage even more information to come forward, eventually reaching a combined total of $1.2 million. With that much manpower, that much money, and that much public attention, it would be reasonable to assume the break in this case came from the task force itself. It didn't. The biggest break in the case didn't come from investigators at all. It came from 3 separate notes. And to this day, those 3 notes still don't agree with each other. Just days after Nancy disappeared, a note reached both her family and local media outlets. It demanded a payment of roughly $4 million, to be paid in Bitcoin, in exchange for her safe return. What made this note different from the flood of hoaxes and false leads that typically follow a high-profile case was what it contained. It referenced a floodlight outside her home that had been deliberately damaged. It referenced her Apple Watch. These weren't details a random opportunist could have guessed. They were the kind of specifics that suggested whoever wrote this note had real, first-hand knowledge of Nancy's home. 2 deadlines were set in that note. Both passed. No exchange was ever made. Investigators made a calculated decision instead of paying the full amount. They sent $152 into the wallet listed in the note. It wasn't a negotiation. It was bait, a small, deliberately traceable amount, designed to see if whoever controlled that wallet would ever move it and, in doing so, expose themselves. More than 5 months later, that money still hasn't moved. It sits exactly where it was placed. Then came a second note. This one was sent on February 6, but its existence wasn't revealed to the public until June 22, months later, at the request of investigators. This note claimed something far darker. It said Nancy had died shortly after she was taken. While all of this played out through official channels, a separate and stranger thread was unfolding through the media, though this part of the story rests on fewer independent sources, so treat it with a little more caution than everything else in this case. According to reports, Harvey Levin, the founder of TMZ and a licensed attorney, began receiving recurring messages from someone using an entirely different, private Bitcoin wallet. Message after message reportedly came in over the following months. In the most recent one, the sender is said to have claimed a hidden phone containing photos, and to have said he knew the identities of 2 people involved in Nancy's disappearance. His asking price for that information was reportedly around 1 Bitcoin. According to the same reporting, when asked to provide even a single piece of proof, he refused, claiming that doing so would expose identifying data buried in the file itself. Experts who've reviewed the exchange believe it's likely a hoax, but as of this recording, nobody has been able to fully rule it out, and no other outlet has independently confirmed every detail of the exchange. Then, in the span of about 24 hours, the entire case seemed to contradict itself. On June 30, an unnamed FBI official told Reuters that none of the ransom notes were believed to be genuine. Not one. The following morning, FBI Director Kash Patel was asked directly to confirm that report. He declined to answer either way. Then, at 6:45 that evening, the FBI's Phoenix office released its own public statement, saying that some of the notes were fake extortion attempts, but that others may potentially be legitimate, and remained under active investigation. 46 minutes after that, at 7:31, the Pima County Sheriff's Department posted its own separate statement. 2 law enforcement agencies. 2 statements. Less than an hour apart. And still, not fully aligned with each other. Crime scene investigator Cheryl McCullum, speaking publicly about the case, didn't soften her assessment. In her words, this investigation is so botched. Her criticism wasn't really about any single note or statement. It was about the bigger picture, that in 5 months, the family and the agencies searching for Nancy have never once stood together, publicly, on the same page. What's left is this. A $4 million demand nobody claimed. $152 that hasn't moved in months. A second note kept secret for over 4 months. And 2 federal statements, less than an hour apart, that still don't fully agree. If you're still with us at this point, drop "still here" in the comments below. This was the densest part of the case to get through, and I want to know who's actually still tracking it with us. While the real notes remained unresolved, one person connected to this case did end up in front of a judge. His name is Derek Colella. He's 42 years old, from Hawthorne, California, and he has no known connection to Nancy, her home, or her disappearance. Investigators traced him through a spoofed internet calling account, the kind that lets someone send messages while disguising the true source. That account led back to an email address, and that email address was registered to Colella. What he actually did was reach out directly to Nancy's daughter, Annie Guthrie, and her husband, Tommaso Cioni. He contacted them personally, presenting himself as someone connected to the kidnapping. When investigators eventually caught up with him, he waived his right to remain silent and admitted the truth. He said he had pulled the family's contact information off a website while watching television coverage of the case. He said he wanted to see if they would respond to him. That admission led to federal charges, and in July, Colella appeared in court. He pleaded guilty to 2 felony counts. During the hearing, prosecutors told the judge he had tested positive for drugs. The judge asked him directly whether he was under the influence at that moment, in that courtroom. He said no. His sentencing is now formally scheduled for September 10, in front of United States District Judge John C. Hinderaker. On paper, the charges carry a possible penalty of up to 2 years in prison and $250,000 in fines on each count. But under the plea agreement he accepted, he won't serve prison time at all. Instead, he faces 5 years of probation. In the meantime, the court has ordered him into inpatient treatment for substance abuse. The terms are strict. If he fails to comply, the U.S. Marshal Service has the authority to take him into custody immediately, no second warning required. It would be easy to look at this case and assume it's connected to the $4 million note, the one that referenced the floodlight and the Apple Watch, the one that seemed to come from someone with real knowledge of Nancy's home. It isn't. Investigators have been clear that Colella is not tied to that note in any way. He's a separate case entirely, a man who saw a national tragedy playing out on television and decided to insert himself into it for reasons that still aren't fully explained. So far, he's the only person who's faced any consequences at all in connection with this investigation. Not the person in the doorbell footage. Not whoever wrote the notes referencing details only an insider would know. Just a man from California who made a phone call he shouldn't have made, to a grieving family who never asked to hear from him. He is, in every sense, a footnote. The real mystery is still out there, completely unsolved. While investigators worked through evidence and courtroom proceedings, another kind of expert was working through something different entirely, the psychology of whoever did this. Dr. Gary Brucato is a forensic and clinical psychologist. He's appeared repeatedly as an analyst on NewsNation's Brian Entin Investigates, and he's also been interviewed directly by TMZ about this case specifically. Over the course of those interviews, he's built out one of the more detailed theories anyone has offered publicly. He starts by ruling things out. A sexual motive, he explains, is statistically rare in cases involving a victim of Nancy's age. It doesn't fit the pattern. Robbery doesn't fit either. Nothing of value was taken from the house. Not jewelry, not electronics, nothing. The only thing missing was Nancy herself, which told him this wasn't about property. It was about her specifically. From there, his theory gets more unsettling. He's raised the possibility that the crime scene itself was staged. The blood near the front of the house, the back door left open, these details, he suggests, could have been arranged deliberately to make it look like Nancy was taken from her home, when the reality may have been something else entirely. He's also floated a theory about how many people were actually involved. He describes it as a kind of division of labor, one person planning and directing from a distance, and a second person, the one caught on the doorbell camera, actually carrying it out. 2 roles. 2 different levels of involvement in what happened that night. What struck him most, watching that footage, was how the person on camera behaved. No hesitation. No visible nerves. A kind of calm that, in his experience, doesn't usually belong to a stranger breaking into an unfamiliar home in the middle of the night. He points to a broader pattern in cases like this one, that the vast majority of people who are harmed by someone they already know in some way, not a random intruder. Put together, the composure on that footage and that pattern lead him toward the same conclusion, that whoever did this likely had some real familiarity with Nancy, her routines, or her home, rather than this being the work of a total stranger acting alone. And then there's the question everyone watching this case has been afraid to ask out loud. 5 months in, with no contact, no proof of life, and no credible sighting, what does he actually believe happened to her? His answer, delivered plainly, is that he believes the odds she's still alive are very low. It's important to be clear about what this is and what it isn't. This is one expert's professional read on the evidence that's publicly available. It's not a confirmed finding from the FBI. It's not an official conclusion from the Pima County Sheriff's Department. Nobody has stood at a podium and declared this case a homicide. What Dr. Brucato has offered is a theory, built from behavioral patterns, statistics, and years of studying cases like this one. It's a compelling theory. It's also, as of right now, still just that. A theory, in a case that refuses to give investigators, or anyone else, anything definitive to hold on to. And theories, however well reasoned, still have to be weighed against something harder to interpret than behavior on a camera. Money. There's a common assumption in cases like this one, that paying a ransom in Bitcoin is basically untraceable, a clean way to disappear with the money. That assumption is wrong. Madeline Kennedy, who works in communications for the blockchain analysis firm Chainalysis, has explained why. Every single Bitcoin transaction is recorded on a public ledger. It's permanent. It doesn't get deleted, and it doesn't get hidden. Anyone with the right tools can see exactly where that money came from and exactly where it goes. The real vulnerability isn't the blockchain itself. It's what happens when someone actually tries to spend the money. To convert Bitcoin into usable cash, it typically has to pass through a regulated exchange. And by law, those exchanges are required to verify identity before allowing a withdrawal. A name. A birth date. Government identification. The moment that money moves through a legitimate exchange, it stops being anonymous. That's exactly why the $152 investigators sent into that wallet matters so much. It was never meant to be a payment. It was a trap, a small enough amount that it wouldn't matter if it was lost, but large enough that if it ever moved through an exchange, it could expose whoever was holding it. The fact that it sat untouched for more than 5 months isn't a dead end. It's the trap, still set, still waiting. Cybercrime attorney Todd Spodek has offered his own read on who's likely behind it. In his assessment, the wallet itself was probably set up using fabricated information from the start, a fake IP address, a fake social security number, a fake birth date, specifically to survive a moment exactly like this one. But he doesn't believe this points to organized crime or professional criminals. His theory is closer to a plan that spiraled far beyond what whoever started it ever intended. There's one more claim worth mentioning here, though it comes with a serious caveat, and it's one report, not a confirmed fact. The blockchain security firm CertiK has publicly described this case as what's known as a wrench attack, involving a Bitcoin demand as high as $6 million, far beyond the $4 million referenced in the original note. Retired FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer called the claim significant when it surfaced. But neither the FBI nor the Pima County Sheriff's Department has confirmed it, endorsed it, or connected it to any note currently under investigation, and no other outlet has independently verified CertiK's figure. That distinction matters, and it's one we'll keep making throughout this video. That's a live theory, not a fact, and that's exactly why we're separating the two for you here, instead of presenting every claim in this case as equally confirmed. This case hasn't just drawn the attention of investigators, journalists, and forensic experts. It's also drawn a different kind of crowd entirely. According to one report, on June 9, 3 men were arrested outside Nancy's home. Alexander Zabel Jr., Troy Lewis Bradshaw, and Damian Todd Enderle. All 3 were live streaming from outside her empty property when they were taken into custody, charged with public nuisance violations. None of them have any connection to Nancy's disappearance. They weren't witnesses. They weren't suspects. They were content creators, standing outside a grieving family's home, broadcasting it live for an audience. It's a small detail in the larger scope of this case, but it says something important. There's a real difference between documenting a case like this one responsibly, and treating an active investigation, and a family's worst possible months, as a backdrop for views. That's a line worth being honest about. Covering a case means asking what actually happened, and treating the people at the center of it with basic respect. It doesn't mean showing up outside someone's house with a camera because the algorithm rewards it. Nancy's story deserves to be told carefully, not performed. So where does that leave this case, right now, 5 months in? Retired FBI Supervisory Agent Steve Moore has offered one of the more candid assessments of what's actually happening behind the scenes. In his view, the contradictions coming out of the Bureau aren't a communication failure. They're a symptom of something deeper, genuine disagreement within the FBI itself, between agents working the case on the ground in Tucson and decision-makers back at headquarters, over how to interpret the evidence they actually have. His read on the blood found near the front of the house is particularly direct. He believes it raises a real, serious possibility that Nancy did not survive long enough for a ransom to have ever been the actual goal. Not a failed negotiation. Not a plan that fell apart later. A plan that may have been built on a victim who was already gone before the first note was ever written. Taken on its own, that's a grim theory. Taken alongside everything else in this case, it starts to look less like a contradiction and more like a pattern. Two federal statements, less than an hour apart, that still don't fully agree with each other. A forensic psychologist who believes the crime scene itself may have been staged to mislead investigators. $152 sitting untouched in a wallet for over 5 months, because whoever controls it understands exactly what would happen if they touched it. None of these things actually cancel each other out. An agency can be internally divided and still be actively working the case. A crime scene can be staged and still contain real evidence. A wallet can sit untouched and still be the single most important piece of digital evidence investigators have. This is what an active federal investigation looks like from the outside, when it hasn't been solved yet. Not clean. Not simple. Multiple things being true at the same time, none of them adding up to a final answer, at least not yet. 5 months in, that's still exactly where this case stands. It's been more than 5 months since Nancy Guthrie disappeared from her own front door. In that time, investigators have logged somewhere between 40 and 50,000 tips from the public. Not one of them has led to a named suspect. Not one has led to an arrest. If you know something, even something that feels small, even something you're not sure matters, that information could be the piece this case is missing. You can reach the Pima County Sheriff's Department tip line directly, or contact the FBI's National Tip Line if you'd rather go through federal investigators. Both are actively monitored, and both are still open to the public right now. A combined reward of $1.2 million remains on the table, for anyone who provides information that helps bring Nancy home, or helps identify who's responsible. Cases like this one aren't solved on a fixed timeline. Sometimes it's a piece of digital evidence finally connecting to a name. Sometimes it's someone who stayed quiet for months finally deciding they can't stay quiet anymore. Sometimes it's a detail nobody thought mattered, sitting quietly in a case file, until the right person looks at it the right way. Whatever it ends up being, this case is still open, still active, and still very much unresolved. We'll be watching for that moment. And when it comes, we'll be ready to bring it to you. If this case ever breaks, we're not going to be the 8th channel reporting it a week late. We'll already have it covered, in full, with everything verified. Subscribe to Case Alert HQ, and turn on notifications, so you're there the moment it happens.